I guess it didn't count down. Hello, everyone. I just want to say welcome to Dan, who is joining us today. And Dan, can you take a second and introduce the listeners of Bite Me, yourself, and what it is that you do?
Hi everyone. My name's Dan Klomstra. I'm a veteran, a father. I did a tour overseas. I'm a husband, a certified ganjier, and currently I'm the cannabis ingredient specialist for the Canadian subsidiary of Boston Beer Company, meaning I develop the liquids that you put to your lips.
That's really cool. And that's exactly why I wanted to have you on to talk about today. But I didn't know actually that you were a veteran and a father and all those kinds of things. But we did meet via the Gangier program. And so maybe before we get started, you could talk a little bit about your experience becoming a Gangier. And maybe we can talk a bit also about how that helps you in your work right now.
Geez, my experience becoming a ganjier was kind of a very unique journey. I've been a medical user of cannabis for almost a decade now, working in the industry for a handful of years, and I've became a steadfast proponent of quality cannabis and kind of the methodology behind it. Like what makes it quality? What can we do to improve the product coming out at all times? I'd have to say the benefits of the certification are really multifaceted in my field. Insight into cannabis culture, knowledge of processing methodology, cultivar expression, expectations, general overall knowledge. They tend to benefit me greatly.
Yeah, well, that all makes sense. I'm sure you're bringing all of that to your work. And I have to say that one of the benefits I've found with the Gangier program is just the network of amazing people that you connect with. And that's one of the reasons why we're talking today. I should mention we're both Canadians, so that's kind of a cool thing. There aren't a ton of Canadian certified Gangiers, so that's a little check mark there too, I guess. But how did you get into the world of product formulation in the first place?
Well, as we seen in cannabis space over the last few years, it's kind of turbulent and tough for many in the space. I was at the point of looking for a new role within cannabis, and I came across the product development role for Boston Beer Company. It wasn't something that I thought I was overly qualified for, but it definitely piqued my interest. I hit many of the qualifications and kind of decided to apply. I'd always enjoyed twisted tea. Thought it was that something cannabis-like would be quite nice. So I applied to kind of what would be a dream role in my mind. And lo and behold, I was accepted. There were multiple interviews, but I landed the role. And right 2 weeks before I was prepping to head down to Garberville for my Gangier 2-day hands-on and examinations.
Oh, right before that. So before you were even certified, you managed to land this dream job. That's amazing. And you mentioned Twisted Tea. For those listeners who don't know what Boston Beer does, can you talk a bit about what other things that they make? Twisted Tea being one of them. Some people may be familiar with that.
Okay, yeah. On the alcohol side, Boston Beer has many big brands. Some that we know in Canada are Sam Adams, Twisted Tea, Angry Orchard, Truly Seltzers. In the States, they also have Dogfish Head, which is like they call it off-centered ales for off-centered people. It's really a unique craft approach to making a very unique and delicious liquid.
Right. No, so American and Canadian brands. I have sampled some Sam Adams and Angry Orchard a few times myself, so that just helps give people context that now they're breaking out into the cannabis beverages space with Teapot. And maybe you can walk us through the process of developing a formulation for a cannabis beverage from initial concept to getting the product on the retail shelves.
Yeah, no problem. That's a big question, but
Right.
I'll do the best I can here. So usually we'll be given a product brief, which is like a description of what the brand stands for, as well as what realm of taste the beverage should fall into. Like setting up some expectations and kind of a little bit of a landing zone to aim for. We start with a very wide array of ingredients, choosing the best as we progress through, multiple blending iterations. After those many blends and sensory sessions, we do sensory on everything we do. We run stability testing to ensure it's shelf stable for the consumer, that they're receiving the cannabinoid content they're expecting, and flavor profile they expect. So even though your beverage may be only a month or two old, we have tasted it up to 1 year to ensure that it will meet those expectations.
Right.
Once we have our master formula, we hand it over to our co-manufacturer who scales up our recipe, and we dictate, critical control points to them to hit to ensure that we're giving it the best. We're bringing out the best liquid.
Right.
And
So
consistent every time.
can you talk a bit about those sensory sessions? Because that sounds kind of interesting. I guess that's where you're really getting into dialing in the flavor profiles.
Yes. So whether through development or lot release or stability, we perform, or even benchmarking, we perform sensory on all of our beverages and a lot of other beverages. What that means is we sit down in a very non-exciting room.
Right.
And you're handed a sample. You're encouraged not to speak, not to impress any thoughts onto other people of what you think the beverage is, or even like a sound or a face can do it. So you have to take it quite seriously when you're doing it. They're still fun, but you do have to take it seriously. So we sample the beverage. We go over the sweetness, the bitterness, the sourness. We go over all the kind of flavor and aromatic points that we may be looking for, as well as points that might be control levers to pull on to maybe make that lemon juicier instead of peely, or something like that, maybe candied instead of juicy.
Mm-hmm. So this sounds like a pretty collaborative process. That's part of the research that goes into creating like a unique flavor for a cannabis beverage then?
Yes, it's
Right.
it's quite some time. All that sensory feedback is brought back into our formulations to progress those forward, and even for testing it up to long term. We still look for, are there potentially improvements we could make in the future to bring that flavor and shelf stability out longer.
And to someone like yourself, do you sort of bring forward some ideas? Because I understand if, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the mango green tea and Pedro Sweet Sativa was sort of your baby. So can you talk a bit about that?
That one, yeah, that beverage took a lot of iterations. It's green tea and mango is challenging. Everyone has an expectation themselves of what green tea should be and what mango should be. And when you mix them together, there's almost new combinations created. So going through those constant iterations of, is our mango aroma there? Well, maybe the aroma is not there, but the body of it is, the flavor. So there's many ways to approach that.
Right. Are there any specific challenges or considerations you have to think about when it comes to formulating flavors like that?
Yes, there are. There's a lot of challenges. Many cannabis beverages will utilize a nano emulsion for getting
Mm-hmm.
the cannabis into it. And while that's great for uptake and effects, there's things we have to consider that we don't want other particles, droplets interacting with the emulsion. That can cause some issues. There's also the potential of ingredients containing certain compounds that may not jive well with others. So ingredient to ingredient interactions kind of critical over time. Maybe an example of that is cranberries or something quite acidic or tannin heavy could cause some issues.
Right. So a lot of things to consider, it sounds like. And you said earlier, it's like a year probably process to start from the brief of what they kind of want to do to a finished product on store shelves? Or are we talking even longer than that?
We're talking maybe 3/4 of a year to a year. Considering that we do up to a year stability testing, the whole entire process is, almost approaching a year and 3/4 to 2 years.
Wow. Okay, so that was a year just to get the product, I guess, to a point where you can then test it for another entire year to make sure that it's shelf stable and what it's labeled as, I guess.
Yeah, it can be challenging in cannabis because every time you put an emulsion or spike it, I call it spiking it
Yeah.
with cannabis. There's a series of testing that you have to go through. It has to have a batch record and be released for us to do. So sorry, Marge, I'm going to pause here. I kind of went away on your question. If you could just that bit out. What was the question again?
I'm just trying to think now because sometimes
the year and a half.
Yeah.
So give me a sec. I'll refocus and start again.
Yeah.
I would have to say the development process definitely takes probably 3/4 of a year. And with regulations with Health Canada, you have to have a minimum amount of time of stability testing to prove that your product still meets potency expectations over time. So 3/4 of a year to kind of design it and get a bit of stability data back. It will scale it up, taste it as the new lots come out, and then as it's going out to the consumer, we kind of have a bit of a lead time. We have a few months on them, so we're able to taste a more aged product than will ever be on the market.
Right. Okay. Well, it sounds like you're doing everything you can to bring the best product to market possible. 2 years is no short amount of time to bring something out. In terms of dosing and potency, is there anything that you feel like shoppers or consumers should be aware of when they're picking a cannabis infused beverage, in your opinion?
First, a lot of consumers should really be aware that having a high inhalation tolerance does not necessarily mean you have a high edible tolerance.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I think, may neglect that sometimes. Yeah, we have our supermen out there and superwomen who believe they're all powerful. And sometimes an edible will set them in their right place if they go that far. Secondly, the edibles you're used to prior to legalization can vary widely in potency. There's no real limits. There's no guidelines for how it goes out. We can always try to get as close as possible to what we believe is an accurate dose, but without a lab test, you truly don't know. You may think you have a high or low tolerance and be surprised with something you think that's a low dose that may send you out to space. Third, what cannabinoids are in it? Are you aware of the effects of those? Are you ingesting CBG, CBN, THCV? Are you aware of maybe some of those are stimulating or somewhat sedating? That's pretty important because you want to assess your set and setting. You want to kind of figure out what you want to get out of your edible or what you're consuming. And if you're not consuming the proper cannabinoids and or ratio thereof, you're not going to get your expected outcome. And go low and slow. If it's your first beverage, even if it's 5 milligrams, drink half. Wait 15, 30 minutes. The nano emulsions are reported to have a little bit faster of onset. So I'd usually wait 15 to 30 minutes if you're not feeling anything. And if you don't, try that last bit. You know what? It's only 5 milligrams in the can. If it all hits you later at a certain time, you are still limited to that 5 milligrams in your system. You're not just hugging a bunch back to try to catch up to your expected effects.
Yeah, that's all great advice. And if you can, I would probably suggest even starting with 2.5 milligrams, which is, I guess, drinking half a can or buying something with just 2.5 milligrams, because I see that over and over again where somebody has like a monster tolerance to like smoking or vaping cannabis, and then they go to the edibles world and they are shocked to find that that does not translate. And it has nothing to do with like your height, weight, any of that stuff. It's just your personal physiology. I know big, large men that have a 5 milligram tolerance, like that's their sweet spot. I know teeny tiny people that, 100 pounds soaking wet and they could ingest 600 milligrams of something, which would make me high for probably a week. So going low and slow is wonderful advice. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
One more.
Yeah,
I will add in that since Teapot is a still beverage, it's not carbonated.
right,
You can drink half and cover it up, put it in your fridge. You don't
right.
have to worry about losing carbonation.
That's a
It's still
great
gonna taste
point.
great.
Yeah,
So
that's a really
don't
good
worry
point.
about losing some of your beverage. You can go
Right.
back to it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I do like a lot of the carbonated beverages, but you're right. If you don't drink it all, it's going to go flat and it not be nearly as a nice of experience as you were hoping for the first time around. So that's a really great point. Can you take a minute to also discuss the role of terpenes in the cannabis beverage formulation and how they're going to contribute to the experience?
Okay, so right now with Teapot, we're blending for no cannabis taste. We're trying
Right.
to appeal to new consumers, people coming over. So there's very little terpene content in that beverage. That being said, as well, terpenes are bitter, and so is the cannabis we put into these beverages. So adding additional terpenes can exacerbate a bitter profile in some undesired ways. I could think CBD is quite bitter too. But in edibles, we're focused highly on the array of cannabinoids for effect, whereas terpenes affect more of your aromatic and flavor experience versus inhalation, where
Right.
terpenes can drive much more of your actual experience.
Right. Now, I am seeing sometimes a few drinks on the market that claim to have like terpene profiles in them. Is that sort of, in your opinion, maybe a little marketing?
There's some marketing to it, but some of these flavor houses, these large flavor providers have very sophisticated laboratories and product development teams. So some of them are analyzing cannabis down to 200 to 500 individual compounds, and then rebuilding that back up and putting it into a beverage to hit that flavor profile. It's definitely unique, but I was in Humboldt last week and I had a beverage that was infused with 6% cannabis terpenes. And what I found from it was it was good. It was really good. They had a nice flavor profile to it. It was rounded, but the taste that you got from the terpenes, because there's probably only so many they put in there, was really singular.
Mhm.
It went in a direction and it didn't have any body to it. So working with terpenes, yeah, can be very challenging, because usually when we smell things or taste things, it's a bouquet. It's a large group of
Right.
aromatic compounds, whereas a terpene is just one of those that we feel expresses that thing well.
Right. So basically what you're saying is some of those like the terpenes that we think of is a singular point, but out in the wild, if you will,
Mhm.
we're enjoying it with a whole bunch of other things along with it. So it's not just one singular terpene that we're experiencing when we're smelling a lemon or whatever the case might be, or a flower.
We're even smelling cannabis.
Right.
We can go through a ton of different terpenes, but each of those in even very some small amounts, depending on the person and your level of detection, can make a huge difference.
Right. That's something I'm still always working on, is improving my palate. It's always challenging, but a worthwhile pursuit for sure.
Mhm.
Had What do you where am I here? I have my list of questions, but, um, I guess one of the questions I had for you as well is if you've had any particularly interesting customer feedback or stories when it comes to your cannabis beverages, maybe the one that you developed specifically or the suite of flavors available through Teapot.
Unique customer feedback. I actually run into it more often than not, and I've been surprised a lot of the places I find it. Discord groups, Instagram, a few other, well, Reddit, of course, but also I myself, I'm not a sales rep or anything, or a marketing activation, but I actually just like to go into dispensaries and talk to bartenders about what I make, to make it more interesting to them and bring that passion forward. But I also take the time to ask them, do you have any questions?
Mhm.
You want to know how that thing is made? What's the process behind that? What do these things mean on your ingredient list, as to what you're ingesting? As even some of these pre-rolls infused pre-rolls can have quite an ingredient list. So yeah. So unique feedback. I entered a dispensary near to me recently, asked to purchase a few cans of Teapot, which I normally do. And the bartender really was enthusiastic and started telling me how awesome Teapot tastes, and that it's sessionable, and that's a nice complement to routine. She said, a lot of beverages out there can kind of stack with bitterness over time, especially if they're high cannabinoid content. That's going to kind of build on your tongue.
Mhm.
And she called her things sessionable. It was enjoyable over many, which was great to hear. I then, they told me that they generally sell it by the case, not by the
Oh,
unit,
wow.
which is also great to hear. I've been to a few dispensaries like that where, beverages aren't exactly a unit format that many people are buying. They're buying a case a week. They're bringing it home. They're consuming it, just like they would anything else.
Right.
Um, so, things like that, people returning to purchase more, recommending it to others, that's memorable. It gives me a warm feeling that our approach is justified and embraced.
Right. So does that mean you're going into dispensaries and engaging in these conversations and then telling them that you're working with Boston Beer and Teapot?
No, I usually go up. I ask about Teapot.
Yeah.
If they have it, usually that's my intro. That I talk about it a little bit. I work as a product developer for this. I could tell you more about it if you have any questions. That really approach it from an education standpoint more than anything else, because there isn't a lot of education out there, and a lot of people don't know how edibles or beverages function.
Right.
And honestly, a lot of processes, even for concentrates, extracts, some of these pre-roll types and these other product formats, there's very little information out there for people. So they love any chance to become more informed, to be able to guide a consumer in a more appropriate direction each
Yeah,
time.
that makes a lot of sense, and I feel like the cannabis beverages, space, it's still relatively small, I think, compared to other product formats like you're talking about, but I see it growing myself, and like you said, those bud tenders that are saying it's sessionable, there's a lot of people that I've spoken to that were like, "Ah, cannabis beverages are kind of bullshit," or whatever, and they've totally changed their mind on it. And I see that as pretty exciting because there is a lot of great aspects about beverages, like the faster onset, it doesn't last as long. So if you're looking to, enjoy a cannabis high when you're out with friends or, using that instead of alcohol, for instance, you're not gonna be high for 6 hours because you don't always necessarily want that, but there's so many great advantages to them, and a lot of canna curious people, I think, are particularly interested in beverages too. Have you been finding that as well?
Yes. Honestly, one of the unique challenges I found recently is still getting to the majority of the population that cannabis is recreational, that there's dispensaries for one, which it's been 5 years now.
Yeah.
You think they
Yeah.
know, but that beverages are a thing. Well, my question is usually, well, where can I buy it? The LCBO. And
Right.
if you don't have knowledge about cannabis, a lot of people just aren't stepping into the dispensaries and just taking that leap of faith because it's not familiar for them. It's it's quite a unique situation.
That's pretty interesting. I never would have thought of that, but you're right. If you're not really familiar with the legal landscape and you're not really super into cannabis and you haven't been to a dispensary, you're like, well, do I get them at the LCBO? That's where I pick up my wine and beer.
Mhm.
So why wouldn't you be able to get your cannabis beverages there? But yeah,
Exactly. So what I try to do honestly is I I give out a lot of my teapot, my own teapot, to people. I bring it to family gatherings, just so even my family could try it.
right,
I bring it to gatherings with my friends, even extended gatherings, and people are often very intrigued because they've never seen anything like that, and they find it's quite enjoyable
right,
once you kind of break over that stigma with them of cannabis.
right, right. Are you seeing any particular kinds of flavor profiles that happen to be popular right now on the, I guess, more specifically the Canadian market, but or Ontario, perhaps?
There are a lot of seltzers.
Yes, there
I,
are. There are a lot.
easily, there are a lot of seltzers. Um, there's a lot of different flavor profiles out there. Sorry, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that one, Marge.
Right. Yeah, no, that's okay. And like you said, there are a ton of seltzers. I've tried a number of them just because I find the seltzers tend to be a lower calorie beverage because some of the beverages are pretty crazy high in sugar, but a lot of the times they can not have much of a flavor either. And sometimes when you want to drink and you're paying, a certain amount of money for it,
Mhm.
it's nice to have something with a little more flavor kick to it.
You don't
So,
want lightly flavored, you want full flavored. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
And even on your calorie point, that's an interesting point to bring up because the Cali sober movement is something that's becoming more prominent, and even with people looking to monitor their caloric intake, cannabis beverages are generally half the calories of any alcohol
Right.
counterpart. So it's very appealing to people when they do see generally calories below 100, sometimes
Right.
averaging around 35 to 50. So that's a great way forward. I think that's a very something that'll be in demand and people are looking at, and people are coming back now and asking about what type of sugar, what type of sweetener are you using. People are just becoming more health conscious and looking at that, and I think that might be driving them maybe more to cannabis beverages and that Cali sober lifestyle.
Right, and it's funny, that sounds like just another nail in the coffin for alcohol. Because it seems like these days, there's a lot of people are sort of looking for other options to alcohol because of its, the health factor, hangovers, and how bad it is for you, and that's not even considering, like you said, the caloric intake of having several beers, for instance, and when you compare that to, however many cannabis drinks you might need to enjoy in an evening, the differences are pretty profound. So that's just another
Yeah,
reason to drink cannabis.
probably, yeah, 350 calories in your evening versus 1,000. And,
Right.
you know, if you're having 5 or 7 cannabis drinks, even 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams, I don't think there's any way that you couldn't feel that.
Oh god, no. No, I just need 1 cannabis drink myself, typically. I find it interesting because, like a 10 milligram drink, I will feel that even though when I'm ingesting cannabis, more traditionally, that a 10 milligram limit is too low typically, so I find that interesting, so I don't really need to, like, be stacking a whole bunch of drinks. But the other advantage too is when you're consuming cannabis, whether you're drinking 1 drink or a bunch, I don't feel like ordering pizza at 11 o'clock at night. There's that other thing. Whereas you have a bunch of alcohol to drink, it's, usually leads to some bad choices, dietary choices often, so
I okay, this leads me into an awesome one.
Right.
Humboldt last week, I brought a work group down there to
Yeah.
educate them about cannabis. And one of my big requests to the hosts was alternative cannabinoids. So
Okay.
we had 5 cultivars with THCV. Uh,
Ooh,
one was called Get Shit Done, and it was 18.5% THCV, total THCV. It was unreal.
really?
The morning I consume that. Was probably the only day that I couldn't eat my lunch later that day, the entire lunch. And you just, yeah, it's stimulating. It's energetic. It's great. And we even had some teas with it too. With THCV, it's my new favorite thing.
So, because you don't see a lot of THCV out there, I've heard a little bit about it myself. Some say you're saying it's a get shit done cultivar, which sounds interesting, and so it's highly like motivating, like you said. But I've also heard that some people have talked about it as a weight loss aid or something, or there's a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, there's a bunch of words floating around that it's can act as a suppressant,
Right.
suppressant. So
Right.
now I would never suggest consuming THCV in the evening because you probably won't get to sleep at any time. But during the day, if you're consuming it, you don't have to worry about crushing the bag of chips next to you or going and, in my case, maybe raiding my kids' school snacks.
Right. We've all been there. That's okay. So basically you're saying that the THCV was like highly stimulating, but then also that's why you didn't want to eat your lunch because you were not necessarily that hungry.
Exactly. And
So
the
interesting.
lunch was really, really, really good. Like it was
Was
something
that
I wouldn't eat
Alex?
normally. Yeah.
Alex Sherman. He's been on my show before too. He's great and his food looks amazing. So I'm sure you guys all ate very, very well and enjoyed a lot of wonderful cannabis.
It's like he can predict the amount of calories and nutrients that you burned
Right.
prior to that meal and create something that is just perfect.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
too overfilling. It hits every energy requirement and
Right.
it's delicious.
That's awesome. Now, is there anybody doing THCV flower in Canada right now that you're aware
Flour,
of?
no, there is a company with an edible and I believe a vape cart. I
Okay.
don't go, into who the company is. We can all find that ourselves
Yeah.
fairly easily. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's all there is in Canada right now. It'll be interesting to see that cultivar kind of come up here in some higher percentages, and just even the kind of the aromatics you would relate to it with the flower itself
Right.
were interesting. I found it either came out and expressed itself with the terpenes and everything else as quite piney with a bit of earth to it, or even some citrus, or kind of a real musky dank if you were finding it in lower concentrations.
Right. Pardon me. That's pretty interesting. I would be definitely interested in that because I like the sort of stimulating stuff. Was it but sometimes I can find the stimulating cultivars can make me also a little anxious. So I don't know if you found that, but I have to be
Not with
careful
this
though.
one. Not with this one.
Yeah.
But that's me,
Right.
and
Yeah.
we're
Of
all
course.
unique. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would give it a shot anyway. So maybe not before bed, like he said, but what's next for you and Teapot in the coming months or year, perhaps? A couple of years. What's on the horizon?
Uh, well, I'm always working on new formulations for Teapot, or maybe other brands that we work on are working on. You know, I have a lot of things in my back pocket that I'm excited to see on the market, and
Mhm.
actually, come January, we'll have our blackberry rooibos tea coming
Ooh,
out.
ooh, that's
Um,
exciting.
yeah, I'm actually really excited for that one. It's I quite enjoy it, and we've got a lot of good feedback. Um, otherwise, there's a lot of exploratory blending, looking into future concepts, and then even at home, I'm getting into a little bit of testing, a little bit of benchtop blending, just stuff that you can't legally do at commands
Right.
or at production facilities. So we're gonna try to get a head start on the day that we might be able to do those things legally.
Right. Right. The black is that blackberry rooibos? I guess that would be a tea, another tea. Um,
It is under Teapot,
yeah.
but that we can be technical here.
Yeah.
Rooibos is a tisane.
Right. Okay.
It doesn't come
Okay.
from Cumulus sinensis, which is the tea plant.
Okay.
So there's that differentiation, but honestly, everyone calls it a tea anyways. We know it as a tea. So
Right.
it's blackberry rooibos coming out.
Right. Well, I like that because I find that I've tried numerous of the teapots out there.
Mhm.
Maybe all of them, I think. But the flavor combinations are really interesting. And I think that's one of the things that sets you apart from some of the other beverage makers on the market where it's just, I don't know, boring, or a seltzer with a little splash of flavor or whatever. So the teapot flavors are really nice. They're very sophisticated. So for anybody who's looking for something nice to bring to, a little gathering, family gathering, some of the instances like you were talking about earlier, it's a great idea. And I'll link to those in the show notes, so that people can find them in Canada. Is there anything else that you're excited about, whether it's professionally, personally coming up for you want to share?
Professionally or personally coming up.
Yeah.
Geez, I'm always big about continuing education. So even though I'm almost 40, I'm looking at going back to university and getting my master's. Just you can never stop learning. You can never know enough.
Right.
And that kind of speaks true for cannabis too. Since
Absolutely.
it's been legalized, research is only now being done outside of Israel and other countries. Like there's so much we don't know. There's so much even about the aromatics that we don't know. We claim THC is king, but after a little bit of time, oh well, THC isn't king. It's kind of singular on your high. It's
Yes.
not rounded. And then we start talking about terpenes. That's awesome. We're talking about more and more things, but still, we don't have that whole pie yet. We still have like only 2/3 of it that we know about. And the future where some of these laboratories for fragrances and other things that test for thiols, aldehydes, esters, everything else will run some cannabis through. I think they're probably limited due to legalities. They're probably all
Mhm.
or something. But finding out more about that and finding out what causes these aromas so we can even dive deeper into finding something very appropriate for your own self so you can go to the dispensary and really hone in on something.
Yeah, I love that because I find continuing education for myself, whether someone's entering into a master's degree program, congratulations on that. That's going to be challenging for you, I'm sure, with your work and family life, but I have no doubt that you'll be a success at that. But the continuing education is so important, and that's why prohibition has been such a detriment to learning more about cannabis because that stops all the research. And like you said, there's so much that we don't know. It feels like we know, but we just don't. Case in point, THCV, that's just an alternative cannabinoid that they're starting to talk about
Mhm.
now, and the potential for that is huge. And like you said, the esters, flavonoids, all this kind of stuff that make up cannabis is wow. Sometimes it's like such a nuanced plant that it's really exciting to be in this space and learning about it. So I'm really grateful to you, Dan, for the work that you're doing out in the world, and you're helping to educate people. And even in your small way, when you're bringing your teapot beverages to a family function, like those small things not only help educate people, but they also help break the stigma as to what a cannabis user looks like because
Mhm.
they come from all walks of life, I've found. So I just want to thank you for your time today. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you. And if I could just have a moment to plug Teapot.
Of course.
You can follow us on Instagram at drinkteapot.com. Our website is www.drinkteapot.com. We do have some solid merch going on with grassroots and whole Stop the Stigma campaign, where a portion of our sales goes towards paying for Canadians' cannabis pardons.
Right.
I believe the last metric I heard was we've paid for 10 people's pardons so far.
That's amazing. Actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I didn't know that Teapot was doing that. I'll make sure to link to all of that in the show notes as well. But a lot of people don't realize that even though it's legal in Canada, you still have to apply for a pardon if you've had any kind of
Mhm.
cannabis charges, and it's not inexpensive. So that's amazing that Teapot has been able to help people with that because it's costly and it can affect your life. So that's
Mhm.
amazing. So thank you for that, Dan.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time today, and we'll
Thank
be
you,
talking
Marge.
soon.
Great time. All right. Thank you.